Hi, welcome to the latest episode of Valley News Digest. I'm John Gregg, the news editor of the Valley News. We're based in West Lebanon. We've been there since 1952, and as many of you know, we cover both Grafton and Sullivan counties in New Hampshire and Windsor and Orange counties in Vermont, as well as statewide issues of both states, and we're on the web at vnews.com. We're joined today by our Lebanon area reporter, Tim Camerato, who's back, as well as our editor, Maggie Cassidy. And first we have Tim. Welcome. Glad you can join us. It's been a couple of months.
Thanks for having me.
You have covered some big municipal and school issues recently, including concerns about the Lebanon School Board and secrecy. What are people saying?
Yeah, so the Lebanon School Board recently had a discussion about an open vacancy that they're going to be having in July. Erin Midori, who's been on the board for a couple of years, announced that she's going to be leaving the country, and so she's going to be vacating her seat. And they had this discussion essentially about how to best interview candidates for the position. And there were some board members who said, you know, is there any way we could do this in a non-public session, sort of away from the public? That way we're not embarrassing anybody with the interview questions that we have, essentially making the process less awkward when we're talking about people who are interviewing for these positions. And so that brought up a lot of questions about whether the board's truly being transparent in how it picks its members, especially since this is normally an elected position, and the board's going to be responsible for picking sort of a full voting member.
Right, so they can appoint a vacancy. They appoint to fill a vacancy until the next election, until next spring.
Which would be March,
Yep.
And so that drew up a lot of concerns essentially about, you know, if the board goes into non-public session, we might not necessarily know why they're choosing certain candidates. The board's majority right now have been in favor in the past of the big building renovation projects that they've proposed that haven't gone over well at the polls. And so there have been some issues about essentially, you know, whether the public's going to have full knowledge of why certain members are being picked for that position.
Right. So, and that earlier vote, that's actually pretty important and something you'd written about before. They took votes on the school modernization and were in favor of it, but it wasn't a unanimous decision, right? In terms of the funding, but what was on the town, the warrant didn't reflect that it was not unanimous, right? And that was a concern that they were criticized for.
Yeah, so there's been people who have said that this isn't necessarily a standalone discussion about transparency, that there have been other instances where the board, you know, in other public officials' minds hasn't been transparent, that this is sort of, you know, one step in kind of a longer process of the board needs to be opening up more and more transparent to the public about what they think of things and how they vote on things.
Right, and you went to try to interview, it's a nine-member board. You went to try to interview these folks, and what did you encounter?
So most of the board members don't talk to the press, including the Valley News. And it's weird how they necessarily state this. So they say that, or at least the board members who don't openly talk to us, say that there's a policy in place saying that the chairwoman or man of the board, in this case it's a woman, is a spokesperson for the whole board. It's interpreted differently by some people. Some people say, well, you know, just because they're the spokesperson for the board, you know, I should be able to you know, talk to whoever I want. I don't give away my First Amendment rights just because I'm joining a school board. But there are a lot of members on the board, and this has gone back several years now, who don't want to say anything that could be seen sort of as out of, you know, what the general consensus on the board is, and don't want to give a differing opinion.
Right. So, I mean, transparency advocates would say it's kind of like if members of Congress came home and said, well, I'm not going to explain why I voted a certain way because only the Speaker of the House can talk for me now that we voted, right? Isn't that kind of an analogous situation?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we and others think, well, we'd like to explain to readers, and voters might want to know why, you know, so-and-so supported this or was opposed to something.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that, you know, that we cite in the story, and that we've cited for a long time now, is that the Lebanon City Council is also a 9-member board, has a policy that says the mayor's the spokesperson for, you know, the whole city council, but every councilor feels comfortable talking to us because they all have diverse opinions, and they all have, especially, you know, diverse areas of expertise. There are some board members who have been in the legislature in the past, who have been sort of, you know, they just generally have, you know, either business acumen or they have different opinions, and so they feel like it's important to share those with us, and we
Right.
feel like it's important to include them.
So the city council talks and explains why they voted a certain way outside of the meetings, but the school board doesn't in Lebanon. Now the
Essentially.
school board, are they alone in the Upper Valley in doing that?
No, the Hartford School Board has had a similar policy for about 10 years, and the Thetford Select Board has a similar position where their chairperson is the sole spokesperson for their board too. So we've encountered it elsewhere. It does happen.
Right, but it's by no means the norm and seems somewhat potentially problematic considering these people are democratically elected, right? That's the feeling?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You have also written about a big push for solar in Lebanon. What's the city doing?
Yeah, so the city has partnered with the company, Revision Energy. They're based out of Concord, but they have an Enfield branch, to essentially put solar installations at 8 sites across the city. It's going to save a little bit of money in the short term. So construction is going to start this summer, and then after that, the city projects it's going to save about $12,000 a year on energy costs for the first 5 years. So during those first 5 years, essentially, the company is going to, maintain and run those installations, and it's going to sell the electricity back to the city at a price that's cheaper than it would get sort of elsewhere. And then after that 5-year mark, the city's going to have the option to buy the solar panels, and that's where sort of the bigger savings come in the long run. And they're saying that over 40 years, it could probably save a couple $1 million in energy.
Yeah, and these are public sites, like rooftops, or where are they going to be?
It's kind of a mix. So most of them are rooftops of city buildings. There are a couple sort of sites that are adjacent to city-owned buildings that are kind of clear sites.
Like a DPW site, right? Isn't there?
Yeah, there's 2 sites at the landfill that are open to this, and then the majority of the other ones are city buildings. Not every municipally owned building is going to get a solar panel. There are some that, especially like the airport, there's been talk about putting solar up there. Revision says that there need to be some sort of roof repairs or some maintenance done there before. But that's a potential future site too.
Yeah, not a lot of trees up there, and you could, once they fix the roof, they might put panels on it, you're saying? Yeah. Okay, and they're not alone either, right? Hanover's done this?
Hanover's done this to, I believe, 2 city sites. They have 2 installations. And Hanover's also, for years now, they've talked about installing a much larger site that would be next to the town's water reclamation facility. And they, for years, have talked about that. Legislation hasn't been sort of favorable to allowing that quite yet, but they've had the site picked out, and they want to expand there as well.
Yeah, so. Hanover's making a big push for renewable energy. Another big energy project in Hanover that we've been writing about, I think you might have once, is Dartmouth is proposing a biomass plant and has identified 3 sites in town where they might build it. It would be burning wood chips to heat their campus, but they've said they'd be willing to also sell the heat to other places. So one of the sites is along Route 120, not far from the Lebanon town line, where Trumbull Nelson was located for a long time. And that's sort of a stone's throw from Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. So we asked, hey, DHMC, are you potentially interested? They have declined comment so far, but it's interesting to see that's, that 120 corridor is fast growing, so there could be a big wood chip plant there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's also one thing to keep in mind too is that corridor was a couple of years ago slated as a proposed site for a liquid natural gas facility. And there's still, I think, an option for a liquid natural gas site there that that sort of, it's made its way through the Utilities Commission and is kind of in limbo right now. But
sure, I mean, there are large commercial tenants or some industrial uses along the 120, so that's where they need the, if they need that sort of new energy supply of some sort, is the feeling. Tim also covered Governor Sununu recently on a visit to the Muskoma Valley. You asked him about a number of issues, but also one of my favorite issues, which is Mink, the bear that has made her way back to Hanover. What did you ask him, and what's his role? Remind readers, viewers, what his role is in all this.
So Mink and her cubs were known in the Upper Valley a couple years ago, particularly in Hanover. And so a couple of years ago, essentially, a couple of her cubs entered a house where there were children.
In Hanover.
In Hanover. Yeah. And sort of after that, state fish and game officials had a plan to essentially kill the bears because they said that they had become too acclimated to humans and too comfortable around humans, and that was sort of a recipe for danger. And Governor Sununu stepped in and saved the bears. So her cubs were sent to Ben Killam's Preserve up in Lyme to be rehabilitated.
The next set of cubs.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Mink was sent last year up to the North Country near the Canadian border. And she traveled thousands of miles and is now back.
Thousands of miles in circles. It's really amazing. We did run the map at one point, and the circles and circles and circles. She denned up in Pomfret. Was spotted in Woodstock, I think in April, and then just recently has been photographed and seen in Hanover. Right now, what does the governor say about, okay, she's back in town, is she a threat? What are people saying?
Yeah, so I essentially asked him, I said, do you regret moving her at all, considering that she came back? And his response was, no, not at all. He thought it was the absolute right thing to do. And essentially said Mink hasn't done anything wrong on her own. Her cubs might have, but Mink necessarily didn't do anything wrong. There's no reason to fear Mink quite yet. And that Mink should be a reminder, essentially, that we live in New Hampshire and that there are bears around, and that you need to, lock up your garbage cans and make sure your bird feeders are taken in the spring. And Mink should be essentially a reminder to people in Hanover and who live in the northern reaches of Lebanon that we live in New Hampshire and there's nature and wild animals outside. So
yeah, there's a big reminder to residents, that there are attractants to bears. Pizza boxes, that's for all the off-campus students, I guess, and bird seed, that sort of thing. And they're trying to get people to comply or even have bear-proof containers, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Tim, thanks for joining us. We'll have you back soon to talk about municipal and legislative issues. And next up, we'll have Maggie Cassidy, our editor. Welcome back to Valley News Digest. This is, of course, graduation season, so many congratulations to the seniors and the college graduates and the proud parents and grandparents out there. Back with us now is Maggie Cassidy, who's been leading the Valley News as our editor since January, and before that was a reporter and web editor at the paper. Maggie, welcome.
Thank you.
You have been among one of the many, many things you've been doing, as talking to groups around the Upper Valley about the Valley News. What are you hearing and what are you telling people?
Yeah, so I've been doing a few events over the month of May where I've been going out to libraries and the Main Street Museum, also in White River Junction, and I've been calling them Ask the Editor. So folks come out and I talk a little bit about the Valley News, and then we're able to talk about local news in general, and they can ask about the Valley News. And so I've done 3 of those, as well as another event that somebody else hosted, and it's been great. The overwhelming thing that I have learned, I think we already knew, but was nice to hear again, is that people really value the Valley News, and we have a really loyal readership who really considers the Valley News to be an important part of Upper Valley life. That includes folks who love our coverage. It frankly has also included folks who have been very critical of our coverage. There have been a few readers who have turned out who were critical of various stories for different reasons, and we talked that out about what the decision-making process was for Valley News to report and publish stories, and I think everybody got to hear each other on that. And I think I also learned that people are, they're thinking about journalism more these days than perhaps they were in their daily lives, and are concerned about the future of local news and about this, financial stability of local news. The executive editor of the New York Times last week made a prediction. It was the second time that he's made a prediction along these lines that local news was essentially not going to survive the next recession. That besides the big papers like the New York Times, say, and the Washington Post, that most local newspapers would be wiped out. And when you talk to people about that at some of these events, they're very concerned about that and find that to be really troubling and want to come up with a way to make sure that that doesn't happen here in the Upper Valley.
Right, and we're certainly all watching that. And one of the things to help us try to survive, we are still very much in our newsroom in West Lebanon. The only thing that moved, we have to keep reminding people, the press did move to Pennacook, New Hampshire, near a village in Concord. So that was a big challenge in the switchover. Most of the bugs seem to have been worked out, but what are there some things we need to sort of remind readers, or what have we had to take on or adjust a little bit to accommodate?
So, I mean, the basic changes are that by moving our printing, so again, newsroom in West Lebanon, but printing in Concord, that means that our deadlines were moved up pretty significantly for the newsroom by about 2 hours every day, which has led to an entire new daily process for us. I think our first, daily news meeting usually happened around 4:30 or 5 in the old world, say, and now we're meeting at noon to try to get that process started. Readers have seen a shrinking in the width of the paper from the broadsheet and shrinking that a little bit, which on our end has led to accommodate that and to be able to print as much news as possible in a smaller paper, a new design, which is essentially a new way of talking for us and a whole new thing to wrap our head around. So there's that, and then also just a new way of communicating with the press, which is a really big deal. There's no more going out back and saying, can you hold on a couple minutes, or how are things going? It's communicating with folks who are down in Concord, which is a different process for us. There have been challenges along the way, big and small. I think that we've gotten our head around a lot of them. I think we've felt our way through this new design, and it's more comfortable for us. For readers who like Peanuts and some of the other comics, and who pointed out that some of them were distorted. Charlie Brown was a little bit more of an egghead.
Uh-oh.
He's back to being nicely circular, we hope. And a few other nitpicky things like that, trying to accommodate where the crossword goes and things like that.
Yeah. One of the things we're doing on the news side with night meetings, because we have this 10 o'clock deadline, which really the paper has to be done by then. So we're certainly covering big meetings, trying to get as much as we can in the paper. If for some reason the big decisions are made too close to deadline or after deadline, we are putting it on the web right away and trying to indicate that in the paper, and then of course it would be in the paper the following day. And
right.
I think we both like to remind readers, if they're subscribers, they can see everything on our website for free.
Right, and that's also been true in sports. I mean, sports, inherently happen later in the day, so the deadline has impacted them possibly more so than any other section. And they've done a great job in terms of if they're at a game, so there was just a game last week where they did this, where in order to make the print deadline, they filed a shorter story that gave the play-by-play of the game and sort of an overview of what happened. And so that made the print edition. And then there was a little indicator in the print edition that folks could read more online. And as they put the print edition to bed and that deadline passed, they were working to enhance that story so that it had quotes from coaches. I think they added some photos, things like that, so that online, you got what happened in the game in the newspaper, and you got a little bit more after deadline on the website. And so that that's one example of what they're doing more and more regularly. both in terms of specific game stories and also their local roundup. You know, if the local roundup being a collection of games of the day, if there are some where they don't get the scores until after deadline, they'll put those online.
Right.
So it's happening across sections, becoming more flexible with how we interact with the web.
Yep. What sort of things, more broadly, do you want the paper to be focusing on in the months and years to come, as we, you know, we're doing more on the web? We don't have quite as many reporters as we used to. What do you hope? Where are we going here?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about in the newsroom, and I've also heard an interest in from readers during these events that I've been doing over the month of May, is to be sort of focusing on and underlining the reporting that we do that you can't get anywhere else, and to be pushing that you know, to the top of the paper, and to be making that our focus in our day-to-day reporting. There are, you know, any number of stories that you would not get if not for the Valley News reporting them, and perhaps they are reported elsewhere after the Valley News reports them. But if not for that initial dig, that news would not be out there in the Upper Valley. I think that it's also true for people, frankly, who don't read the Valley News. There is a trickle-down effect of news. If you're talking with your neighbors about, you know, the salaries of, you know, the highest paid people at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, and maybe you're a DH employee, and that's of interest to you. If you didn't read it in the Valley News, you know, your neighbor did, and that's how you're able to talk about it.
Sure.
And without that, there would be, you know, a huge gap of information in the Upper Valley.
Yeah, just to be clear to our viewers, I mean, to get those stories, we went, and they're nonprofits, so they have to release their tax forms once a year, but it's kind of complicated. You have to dig them in and parsing between what's a calendar year and a fiscal year, and trying to put in context and perspective, sort of, you know, are these people getting dramatic raises while other people aren't? That's stuff that takes some real reporting and some experienced reporting, and we've had that with these stories. And as you said, then there's a trickle down, but you're not going to see that immediately on a television station, for instance, if
Right.
that's.
Or on Facebook, you know, so even if these, you know, some of what we report on are public documents, so, you know, a savvy person could go and get those documents, but that's obviously not going to be everybody. You know, some of what you were talking about just before with Tim, you know, trying to talk to public officials. Yes, an individual could go and try to talk to his or her, you know, school board representative, but that's not going to be available to the greater, you know, public. And some of it is also, you know, pushing back when information is withheld. You know, we file right-to-know requests on behalf of the public, and also, you know, so we've been talking a fair bit about hard news, but also features and you know, stories that connect you with your community, and you know, share things about your neighbors, your community members, the folks who live in your region that you might not have had access to otherwise.
Yeah, one of our feature writers, Sarah Earle, and Jennifer Hauk, our chief photographer, have been doing a whole series of stories on the White River Valley School in Bethel, the newly opened middle school, and that's an important look at not only for those communities that send their kids there, but some of the ramifications of Act 46 and stuff. So, but that takes a lot of work.
Right. So, I mean, in some ways, for the newsroom to focus on stories that you can't get anywhere else isn't necessarily all that new for the Valley News. That has been true for a long time, that we have been doing stories that are not available elsewhere. But to really drive in on, okay, so where, you know, if we have limited resources, which of those stories are we going to be able to do? Finding the most important ones that otherwise we really think would go untold in the Upper Valley has to be our focus.
We had a big story over Memorial Day weekend by Josh Weinreb, a sports reporter, about a transgender athlete at Thetford Academy, Belle Spellman, and he spent a lot of time with her. You helped edit that story, did a lot of work on that. Why do you think that was an important story to tell readers?
So I think that falls into that last category that we were talking about, connecting you with your neighbors, whether you're not necessarily your next door neighbors, but this is a community here in the Upper Valley that the Valley News plays a really significant role in connecting all together. And so to be able to tell the story of this young person who is going through this journey, who is coming out as trans, and how that affected her running career. That might be, for some readers, the first time that they're hearing from somebody who has gone through those experiences. And in general, I just think that, when we're able to tell individuals' stories and also put them into a broader context. So what Belle decided to run on the boys' team because she had been running on the boys' team all her life at Thetford Academy. And we, talked to her about what that meant for her, and also looked at how, her decisions, what policies were in play, and what sort of bigger forces were at play here around her decision-making process. So again, that's the kind of thing, Belle was very open about talking with us, and her friends and community members would be able to talk to her about that if when she's willing to share it. But to be able to also look at the bigger picture and the bigger context is what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And then finally, a lot of readers who come to our stories on the web come to our stories through Facebook, and a number of people get it, but there are some people who persistently don't like the fact that we have a soft paywall. But we have a paywall, but you can get some stories for free. What are you dealing with? Because that's something you have to respond to every couple of days, it seems like.
Yeah, so I mean, so we have a paywall. The way that it operates is essentially that you can read at least 4 stories a month before you're asked to pay to continue reading. We used to, formerly when I was web editor and folks would complain about the paywall, I essentially let them have their say and didn't try to jump in. But now I'm taking a little bit more of an active role in explaining why we have our paywall, what it means to be supporting local news and why that's important, which comes, full circle to what folks who attended these events that I've been doing over the past month are talking about. So, it's still, even if you can't hold the paper in your hand, the work went into producing those articles with what we've been talking about. The skills, the time, the energy, the gas mileage, the phone bills, all of that is a cost to provide local news to the Upper Valley. And so, we do allow folks to read some articles for free, but ultimately, if you're trying to read 5 or more articles, we expect that you're finding some sort of value in what we're producing and feel that it's fair and reasonable to ask for something in return to ensure that the next time you want to read about whatever it is that we're reporting on, it'll be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good news from the forums, as you're saying, is that there are still a lot of people who are, regular readers or subscribers who get it, who understand that there's a cost to producing good journalism, and we're very grateful for their continued support.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for joining us. Viewers, thank you for watching. And again, congratulations to graduates, and we'll see you in a month.